Hello again, this is UML Operator. All right, in this session we're going to pick up where we left off in requirements development through activities part 2. All right, so we're going to take our activities and we're going to build use cases around those. And what I mean by around those is relevant too. So you see we've got our activities, which had our flows, and we have our use cases for each one. So access to access, access failed to access failed, tailoring, ordering, and order processing. All right, so let's get started. So this session is part 3 of a multi-part series. There'll be more to come. As I just spoke about, we're going to be lining our use cases with our activities. We're going to use or reuse a pattern to support effective use cases shown in a previous video. We're going to be tracing our activities to our use cases to draw relevance during and through collaboration and development or project delivery. Building our effective use cases and models will require attention to the use cases as they match our activities. We'll be building scenarios using the structured editor for steps, exception handling, and alternate paths. And you will learn how to generate activity diagrams from our structured builder as discussed in another previous video. After that, we'll be reviewing and adjusting our steps and diagrams to make sure that they fit our scope. And we'll do this through simulating our scenarios and preparing better or for better requirements engineering. So the first step is to start to bring in our activities as links into a use case space where we'll add our use cases to start our effort. Note that these links are the original activities. We're simply inserting these references so that we can reuse the elements and their data entities. Next, we'll bring in our use case pattern. We'll bring this in to reuse as we develop our use cases for this project. I developed this pattern several years ago, and it's still applicable today. This pattern represents a proper formatted use case context as presented in a previous video. Now we will add blank use case elements that match the name of our activities. From here, we copy and paste our pattern description content to each one of the blank use case elements. This will help guide us in creating effective use cases as seen in the Building Sparx Effective Use Cases series. So this is a very important step in getting started because it will help you more productively build out your use cases in a manufacturing or assembly line method. So I'm going to go through building this content quickly. You can always reflect back on the effective use case series. So what we're going to be doing first is we want to bring in the context from the activities that we brought into the use cases and then add it to the effective use case form. This will help us get started as we move through the other areas of entry to complete. Before we continue building our use case descriptions, let's draw traceability from the relevant activities to each relevant use case. We're using the dependency connection with a trace stereotype, but using dependency without the stereotype is fine. This helps us in our data relevance across our models and stories as we proceed. With our traceabilities to activities now in place, we can remove the activity elements from our use case diagram. Now we can complete the use case diagram with scope, boundaries, actors, and connections. Okay, now we can finish each of our use case element descriptions. With the bases in place, it's much faster to complete each cycle. Our scope is our scope boundary, where we can return later and expand the content if necessary. Also note here that we're starting with these use cases at the summary level, explained in the effective use case series. Next, we bring in our primary actors. As stated earlier, use case diagrams focus on the system's interaction with external actors and its high-level functionality, while activity diagrams focus on the internal behavior and flow of activities within the system, in scope, of course. Both diagrams play important roles in different aspects of system modeling and design. This is one of the reasons why we use both use case and activity diagrams. Our use cases will expose scope for our actors, while our activity diagrams will expose the behavior and flows within the system or systems in scope. Now let's think about our preconditions, triggers, and events necessary to drive our flows. These are important points where things or events start and are necessary to proceed in any flow necessary for successful outcomes. These could be initial starts, actions, activities that provide the necessary preconditions, rules, and/or constraints. Now we need to add our stakeholders and their interests. Stakeholders represent a different user perspective in both the activities and the use cases. Just as important as primary actors, it's important to understand and represent the views, viewpoints, and concerns. Each use case may have different concerns, requirements that must be addressed in the system or systems. These interests or concerns need to be addressed in scope, functions, and will drive other use cases. Now we get to the most important factor in effective use cases, which are guarantees, starting with what is minimal for the use case to succeed. Minimal guarantees are how the interests are protected under all exits. For example, and to keep it simple, for login use case, the minimal guarantee is to authenticate or be authenticated or simply succeed in login. But even a failed attempt could be attributed to a minimal guarantee. Thus, this consideration leads to the use case for failed login and the need to add the success guarantee so that the use case is clear on its objective. All right, so this is a big one, success guarantees, and probably the most important point of use cases. The success guarantee represents the state of the world if goal succeeds. Both minimal and success guarantees are important to testers as well as client stakeholders, of course. Success guarantees in use cases refer to specific outcomes or results that a system, application, or process is expected to deliver when it is used as intended. These guarantees are essentially the promise or assurance that a particular use case will provide certain benefits or meet certain requirements. Keyword there. They help define the success criteria for use cases and ensure that it delivers value to its users and stakeholders. As with activity diagrams and state machine diagrams, triggers become an important event for starting a flow in our use case models. Without triggers, what is used to start a flow, process, or function? This should be one of the first questions when starting a use case. What is triggering this use case? We should focus on one thing, and focus should be on the primary thing or event that starts the use case. If you have more than one event or thing that starts a use case, you should split the use case. For example, a user cannot log in if they're not registered or have an account. Thus, a trigger when the user attempts to launch a page or function, and thus there may be other use cases, for example, add products and services. If there is no account, a registration use case is triggered. If they have an account, but it is locked or suspended, another use case is required, and so on. So be sure to be clear on what the trigger is for a particular use case. Now for the most important exercise in Sparx EA for use cases, and that is providing content for our scenarios for the structure editor. We'll use the structure editor for this content and then auto-generate activity diagrams to test our understanding of each use case. You can always come back and build or update your main success scenarios from the structure editor and activity diagram generated flows. This is where most of your gap analysis and requirements development will come from. We need these main success scenarios for every use case. Remember, we're at the summary level, and you can keep things at a high level and then later drill down into user goal and sub-function level use cases as we proceed. Now, this next part is optional, but I do it because it's productive for me. But I like to copy my main success scenario content to my scenario description for the structure editor. This exposes notes specific to the structure editor, which we will reflect on as we're developing our steps and flows. Having our scenario content in the description allows us to make changes without impacting the use case content during this exercise. As we finalize, we can then copy our revisions back to the use cases if required. This is why this optional exercise is a good practice. With our structure editor open for each use case, we see our description and notes, which we will then use to start or enter each step. Here with the basic path first, then we will add our exceptions and or alternate paths. The more important aspect of structure building is the addition and management of exceptions and alternate paths. These decision points in our generated activity diagrams lead to loops and or other final events. With what we've done so far, and a good practice as you build your scenarios, is the ability to auto-generate and test your scenario's assumption. Here we want to use the best workspace configuration for this exercise to make things as efficient use of time as possible. Here, even though we've added a couple of exceptions, we see that our results do not include them in the generated diagrams, so we can fix them now. So we will return to the use cases or use case that we need to fix. We'll open the use case and structure editors to fix and update our flows. We need to add the steps for each exception and or alternate path in order for them to be generated correctly or properly. We will add our exception steps, then check our joins to ensure they are looping to or ending effectively to meet our success guarantees. Before doing our final run on all of the use cases we've done, we may also take this opportunity to add assumed results and state, but this is optional. However, be sure to follow your shop's naming convention and be consistent in such naming. We will generate a replacement activity diagram, and we will now see that the exceptions are included. Okay, so now we've built out our activity diagrams for each one of our use cases. There's 5 of them that are here. We're going to make some adjustments to our login or access activity diagram. We'll do the same for each one of those, and then we'll do a final run before we wrap this up. Okay, that was fun. We went through a great deal of knowledge in a short period of time. We took our activity diagrams from previous sessions and we used them to start our use case modeling. From those effective use cases, we auto-generated activity diagrams to validate our flows, decisions, loops, and ends. All of this will support the remainder of our requirements engineering objectives. In our next session, we will focus on requirements engineering, which includes requirements development and requirements management. We will identify what is current mode or already implemented and start our gap analysis to support requirement solicitation and analysis. We will build test cases to support requirements validation and test-driven design, or TDD. We will expose some basic project management capabilities in Sparx Enterprise Architect, which will be supported by collaboration among stakeholders in the project. All of what we've been doing here leads to requirement specification in which we will generate reports and other artifacts. We will expose traceability capabilities in Sparx Enterprise Architect, which is important to telling our stories. All of these practices support continuous development and continuous integration, or CACD. Thank you for watching and spending the time here. Please leave comments down below, good or bad, and let's work together as we progress together. So I'll see you in the next session, and until then, happy modeling.